Hello and welcome to the Right Around the Murray Festival's 2020 online program launch. My name's Anne-Marie, I'm the festival director and I'm talking to you from the Albury Library Museum here on Wiradjuri country, where we pay respect to Wiradjuri elders past, present and emerging. The annual WAM Festival is on from the 9th to the 13th of September this year, and we're live streaming the entire program this year given our social gathering and travel restrictions. And our launch event tonight serves two purposes in the program. For one thing, it's a bit of a practice run for us to get comfortable with the technology ahead of our events in September. And secondly, this event, entitled Future Tense, plays into our festival theme, Past Lives, Present Tense, a theme which obviously resonates with our moment in time. It feels very apt to be launching with a discussion of ghost species and Wolfe Island. Reading James and Lucy's novels, there's a strange feeling of inhabiting wholly familiar but decidedly different and unsettling worlds. That sense of living in a changed world is quite tangible and disorienting, and something that we're all negotiating at the moment. And I suspect we'll be exploring this idea in different ways throughout the festival come September. But right now, I'd like to invite Jason Steger into the virtual studio from his home in Melbourne. Hello, Jason.
Hi, Anne-Marie. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you all the way over there.
Yeah, it's such a shame I'm not up in Albury.
Oh, well, welcome to the online experiment. It's lovely to, how many festivals have you been here presenting events for us? And this is
I've lost count.
I've stopped counting, but this is the first festival program you've launched for us.
So correct. Yep.
It's really nice.
Well,
let's hope the experiment works.
Yeah.
Jason is going to be joined in a moment by Lucy Treloar and James Bradley. Before I leave you, Jason, to introduce your guests, I'll just let our listeners know that you can type in questions for Lucy and James towards the end of the conversation. You can type them into the chat function, and Jason will come to your questions toward the end of the session.
Mm-hmm.
And Jason, I'll pop back in at the end of the session to let people know what festival events you, James and Lucy will be part of in September. But I'll pop out now and we'll bring Lucy and James in, and I wish you all a great conversation. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. It's very nice to be back at Right Around the Murray, even if I'm not actually there. I've forgotten the number of times I've been to the festival, but this is the first time I've been involved in a launch event. And it's a real treat to be talking to two of Australia's finest writers, Lucy Treloar and James Bradley. We'll talk for about 40 minutes or so, after which there will be some time for questions. And remember, if you haven't read their books, get to your bookshop tomorrow. That is, if you're allowed to go to your bookshop and buy them. Unfortunately, of course, they won't be able to sign them for you. Lucy's first novel, Salt Creek, won several awards, including an ARBIA award, that's an industry award, an Indie award, and the Dobby. It was also shortlisted for Australia's most significant literary prize, the Miles Franklin. Her second, Wolfe Island, was published late last year and is set in the not too distant future when the seas are rising and the world in which the characters exist is experiencing social and political upheaval. Kitty Hawke is an artist living alone on the eponymous island in Chesapeake Bay. When her granddaughter Kat turns up along with three other characters, the dramatic events of the book are set in play. It's a powerful, beautifully written novel and is really very moving as well. James Bradley has written 5 novels for adults: Rack, The Deep Field, The Resurrectionists, Clade, and now Ghost Species. He's also written novels for young adults. He's written poetry and edited, rather appropriately in this context, the Penguin Book of the Ocean. Ghost Species has 2 scientists, Kate and Jay, joining a project in Tasmania masterminded by a mysterious tech billionaire, Davis Hucken, that intends to bring back to de-extinct a Neanderthal person. All this while the world is undergoing the sort of disintegration seen in Wolfe Island. Eve, as the Neanderthal girl is of course called, is a brilliant creation. Brilliant by James, that is, rather than Davis Hucken. But the ethical issues are considerable, and Kate decides to abscond from the institution with Eve. It's a dramatic, thought-provoking book that is brilliantly imagined and realized. In the normal course of events, this is the point when I would say, please welcome Lucy and James, and you'd give them a big round of applause. But as we can't hear you, let's just carry on as if you are going to give them a big round of applause and welcome James and Lucy. Right.
Yeah, hello, thank you.
Absolute silence, absolute silence. Well, welcome anyway to this virtual session. What the books have in common, it struck me, was a concern for the state of the world. In each, there is a disintegration and a fracturing of the world, both environmentally, politically, and socially. And it struck me, I just wondered to what extent picturing those worlds was the motivation for the novels.
Go, James.
I can go first. Yeah, absolutely. It was a very big part of the motivation for me. I mean, I guess what I was interested in writing about at the beginning, I'd been thinking a lot about loss and extinction, and I guess that kind of the increasingly uncanny nature of the world, that sense that the time and space are kind of out of joint, and the idea of bringing back extinct species seemed to be a great way of thinking about that. But I was also, one of the things I really wanted to try and think about was to get past that sense of, you know, I think we exist in a state of kind of denial a lot of the time about what's going on. Amitav Ghosh talks about the great derangement, which is this sense that we, you know, everything in our culture militates to hide from us what's going on. So the single biggest thing which is going on around us, which is climate change, is something we don't talk about. And I wanted to find a way, I guess, of talking about that in a way that recognized where we are, in a sense, that didn't shy away from how bad it already is and how much worse it's going to get. So it makes it sound like a very cheerful book. There's that kind of sense of wanting, I guess, to get past denial and think about what happens once you get past denial.
Right. So you've gone that one step extra, really. Yeah,
and I think one of the things that was disconcerting about writing the book was that sense that you're going one step extra, but even in the time I was writing the book, you could feel reality kind of overtaking you. I mean, I started the book, I guess, 2 or 3 years ago, and by the time I was editing it, you know, I was doing the editing in Sydney, as the place is completely choked with smoke. You know, so I mean, it's this kind of sense that hastening unraveling of the world was kind of overtaking the writing of a book about the hastening unraveling of the world. And I'm sure it's a feeling Lucy would talk about as well.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing that the instigating point that propels you into a book. And for me, it's never really an idea. It is an image or a place followed by a person. And in the process of writing, I discover the stuff that I'm really thinking about. And clearly with Wolfe Island, what I saw was a picture of an island that was completely covered by a clapboard house, just a large clapboard house with no kind of land left around it. A little bobcat that was used to kind of push up these ramparts of earth to hold the sea at bay. And as soon as I saw it, I just thought, my next book. It was like being harpooned by the idea in some way. And then I saw a lone person up there. And the minute you have that landscape and then a person, a series of questions arise that I had to follow as a novelist. And I guess it was in following that I thought, this is the thing that I'm desperately worried about. The world is falling apart, not only in a kind of climate sense, but, in a whole lot of ways, geographically, socio-politically, and all of that was fomenting in the back of my mind the whole time I was writing, just that exploration of that material. But that, for me, has to be sort of peripheral almost to the main game, which is what's it like for this particular person in this particular place? How are events going to overtake her? What is she going to do about it? And exploring it from that extremely, it's kind of a narrow frame in some ways. But it's the way that it helped me to explore that material in a personal sense from that character's point of view.
So you say was the photograph of a house in Chesapeake, was the island that you saw, it was in Chesapeake Bay?
Yes, that's right. It's an island called Holland Island, and it disappeared in 2011. I didn't get there in time to see it. Yeah. But it's pretty spectacular. The images of this house just kind of gradually crumbling and, turning into a kind of roost for a series of water birds, pelicans, and so on. And then just, as if the birds themselves are pushing this house into the sea. Extraordinary images and incredibly resonant to me and highly metaphorical.
And James, so your world is set very much yours is in Tasmania, and it's quite recognizable, I guess.
Yes, it is. Although I had someone who lives in Tasmania asking me about some of the geography the other day, and I was like, no, it's all made up. It's like, they're kind of going, so where was the house? And I was like, well, it's imaginary. It's not a real house. But yeah, no, I really wanted that. And one of the things that I really wanted the book to do was to sit, I guess, on that kind of breaking wave of what it's like. I mean, Lucy was talking about it then, that sense of what it's like to be alive right now, that sense of hastening change, hastening kind of breakdown, hastening, I guess, uncertainty about things. And I really wanted to find a way of, I guess, kind of writing on that wave, if that makes sense. So I wanted a kind of book that was that felt quite light on its feet. Does that make sense? That felt quite kind of, when I was writing, I kept thinking I wanted to be like a stone skipping over water, like that kind of sense that it's just kind of moving through time. So it's got that sense that we are kind of in this moment of kind of great change. And I think Lucy's absolutely right. There's that sense that you're trying to write out of at the moment, of both out of kind of increasing breakdown on a series of fronts, but trying to capture somehow the way that's all interconnected. That kind of sense that the environmental breakdown is connected to the political breakdown, which is connected to the increasing violence in particular places. I mean, that kind of sense that these things are all feeding off each other. And that's absolutely something I was trying to get at in the book.
I mean, certainly one of the other things it has in common is this question of human dominion over other humans, over other species, over the planet. They both, I mean, in Ghost Species, your character Eve, the Neanderthal girl, says the desire to dominate, to kill, to give in to their most primal urges infects human society, disfiguring it at every level. Even the fires she can smell, the disruption of the forest, can be seen as an expression of that same violence enacted on a planetary scale. And so, I mean, that issue of our dominion over the planet and other species seems to me to be central to both books, because Lucy, Kitty, your character, Kitty Hawke, the artist, she's completely dismissive of the idea of dominion over the planet.
Yes, she is, and I think she describes it as the evilest thing she can think of. I think you had that quotation. I think that's probably reflective of my own view, I think, and it's partly to do with my interest in colonialism, and so much of that springing from a Christian tradition. And it's an interest that started for me with Salt Creek. I was looking at the beginning of colonialism and the destruction that wrought. And this, in a way, Wolfe Island is it's an expression of the end point of colonialism, when the world actually starts collapsing in a literal sense, geographically, it starts collapsing under the weight of what, development, use, overuse of every resource that there possibly is. And so that Kitty, observing those things and also highly aware of, the great beauty of the world that she lives in, is struck dumb by grief, as so many of us are watching what's happening. But also can't help observing the source of those things. And it's, when she leaves the island, it's kind of interesting, and I didn't realise this until later. It's that she stops being as world aware as she was on the island, that around people she becomes more human, more driven to do the things that will protect people, that are less landscape aware. But I couldn't see a way around that, because I see so much of that, that we all look after the people we love. And, sometimes it is to the world's detriment, but we're monsters if we don't do those things. So I just think it is the bind of humanity in a way, but that doesn't mean we should give up trying. I'm a very hopeful person.
James, the dominion in Ghost Species is sort of quite, obviously it's similar, but there's also that one about, there is that dominion of actual creation of somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting what Lucy says about colonialism, because it seemed to me like in a sense that's a constant unspoken presence in Ghost Species. The book's set in Tasmania for a reason. There's this kind of sense that it's this book about extinction, which is set in Tasmania. So there's this kind of vast unexploded bomb sitting in the background all the time, which is about the kind of colonial history of that place. But yeah, that kind of idea of dominion is really important. One of when they start the project, the billionaire Davis, who wants to do it, one of the reasons he wants to do it is he says, look, if what we do is we displace humans and we say we are no longer the only sentient species on the planet, then we're forced to see ourselves through the eyes of this other species. So there's this kind of level at which he's kind of at one level looking to make this other human species again, so that so that we can kind of see ourselves differently, and which is one of the things that actually happens in the novel. Eventually, once Eve's created, she sees us very differently to the way we see ourselves. But there's a sense also that kind of idea of dominion in the novel ends up unraveling. There's that wonderful saying about nature always bats last, and in the book, nature does bat last. We keep pushing it and we keep pushing it, and then it gets its own innings and it's all over for us. So, that kind of sense of dominion is there, but what one of the things the book is about is that at one level that dominion leads us into incredibly destructive behavior, but it's also illusory. We actually don't have dominion over the world, whatever we think we do.
So when you were writing the book, presumably there was a certain amount of research that you had to do in terms of extinction, de-extinction, Neanderthals, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Yes, there was. Look, the book is, in a sense, Lucy was talking before about that moment when you've got a book, and I must say I had that with this, where I had this quite clear image of this couple with this Neanderthal child. And the minute I had that, I thought, well, there's the book. And it's that wonderful moment you do have with some books where you have this real flash about where they come from. I guess, in an odd kind of way, my way into it was reading around de-extinction and animals and things rather than reading the Neanderthal science. So, I kind of came into it thinking about systems and species and things like that. And so, yeah, there's quite a lot of kind of research in it, but also what they do is at some level scientifically impossible. So, what I needed was something that sounded scientifically plausible, but was perhaps not entirely plausible, but certainly about trying to think about what Eve might have been like as a person, like how Neanderthals might have been different from us was something I had to do quite a lot of. And the answer to that is, everyone has different views about how different they were. So you end up just making a series of assumptions in the end.
So you could actually have a lot of fun creating her.
Yeah, I did. I mean, one of the things that was really important to me in the book was, I mean, you said at the beginning she's a Neanderthal person, and that was really important to me, that she was a person, that she was not, she was not this kind of subject through the whole book, that she was someone who had her own agency, her own life, her own story, but also someone who was both like us and not like us. So there's the level at which she is, she is different to us. Her species live in smaller groups. They're less able to handle large groups. They're physically slightly different to us. But also there's a series of things that we do just routinely that she finds really difficult to deal with. And there are a number of things around lying. So there's a whole lot of stuff in the book where she finds all of that stuff where Homo sapiens are so good at just lying to each other. It's just a natural thing that we do, which is something she can do if she needs to, but she finds difficult and weird. So there's that sense that she's just wired a bit differently from the rest of us.
Yeah. I mean, she's Lucy. You have Kitty is a very strong female character at the heart of Wolfe Island. Was she an easy character to create?
She seemed pretty fierce to me the minute I pictured her looking out of the upstairs window of this broken house, just kind of glaring down at this broken world. I thought she was quite fierce. There are a whole series of developments that happened that seemed to me to happen on a really subconscious level. And so one of the things that was a kind of breakthrough moment was trying to work out the name for the island. And I went through a whole bunch of iterations and none of them seemed right, like Goat Island. There is a Goat Island there. But, no one is going to call a book Goat Island or be that interested in it. It's got to have something going for it. There was a Fox Island and I thought, oh, not Fox, but Wolf. And as soon as I thought Wolf, Wolf. And that didn't make me make Kitty wolfish. But I think those things start working together. And once you start having this kind of, a kind of metaphorical thread that runs through things, that helps a huge amount in developing character and plot. And that's certainly what happened with her. But I'm so interested in the character of Eve. And I was thinking about it a lot when I was reading it. And it was that kind of guilelessness that she has, that she doesn't really understand deceitfulness. And I was thinking that she has that directness. She is what she is. She doesn't have it in her to be kind of deceitful. And I think that has such a kind of great resonance when you put that in a book, when you have humanity, what humanity means, all of the kind of awfulness, as well as the really great things about it. And you contrast that with something like Eve or with Girl. That they have a whole lot of characteristics that we think are wonderful, but also these other kind of qualities that we're kind of troubled by in a way, but which reflect on us. They show up to ourselves. And when I read that thing about Eve, there was something about these kids whispering in a mean way. I just thought, I just suddenly could see her popping off the page. And I feel like with Girl, Kitty's wolf dog, she makes you see people just by the contrast that she is.
So, in a sense, Girl and Eve they're both the moral touchstones, aren't they?
I guess.
That's really interesting, isn't it? I was just going to say that I do think that's one of the things animals do in books, is they become, there's the idea that, as you say, they reflect ourselves back at ourselves, because we suddenly see what's awful about ourselves in them, and in their kind of connection to their true self. I mean, there's also a sense that we kind of abstract ourselves endlessly from what we should be,
and the self-reflectiveness of people, that seems to be a little more lacking in other creatures. Yeah, fascinating.
I was always very struck when you'd hear people talking about animals like, particularly chimps, but lots of kind of highly intelligent animals. And what people will do is look at chimps and say, they're clearly really intelligent. They use tools. They show what looks like primitive religion. They do all of these things. What we don't do is look at them and say, because they're all things that we like about ourselves and we see them in them, but then we don't look at them and say, chimps also fight wars, murder each other, like do all of these truly appalling but highly sophisticated things that we also do, which would seem to me also to be markers of high intelligence, just not markers of very nice high intelligence.
Yeah, and wolf dogs are really vicious sometimes as well, and you wouldn't want to get the wrong end of their teeth.
No.
Yeah.
But given that both the books are, for want of envisage a somewhat dystopic world, how did the writing and the creation of them actually affect you two as their authors?
Oh gosh. I the whole time I'm writing, I have the voice of that character murmuring away in my head. It's a little bit like they accompany me through the world, chatting, and I have their accents in my head, and let's go to the shops. All right, we're going to the shops. Just this kind of routine way, and it's a way of keeping them close to me. But there are various things that are kind of like they're great. If the writing's going well, you feel really close to the character, and you feel like you're on top of what they would do, their reactions, the way they might behave. But there's also this other side of it where you think, oh my God, I think she's going to, do whatever it is that she does. She's going to kill someone. Oh, I don't really approve of that kind of thing. And you have to let go a little bit. But you also have to be able to access that. So this kind of feeling that you have a weapon in your hand. And while I was in the Chesapeake Bay doing some research, I remember standing outside a gun shop thinking, I should go into the gun shop. I should go and find out how you buy a gun. I don't even know if I can buy a gun. I should do it. And I stood outside the gun shop just staring in, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to wing it. I am going to wing the shooting stuff. I don't think it's second nature to her. There's some stuff I don't need to know. She's just going to pull out a gun. Who cares what kind of gun it is? It's a Glock, it's a whatever. I don't care. And I didn't think Kitty would either. And she would just shoot. And that's the kind of person she was. So, but I had to kind of stand there in a Kitty-ish way thinking, what am I going to do?
She was very adept with a gun, wasn't she?
She was. Yeah. I love a spy thriller, so it probably comes from that. I'd love to do that kind of thing.
And what about, the actual, the picturing the world, the sort of disintegration, that sort of thing. Does that have a lingering effect on you as the author? Does that, do you emerge from creating this world thinking, oh, this is awful. We're going to hell in a hand, whatever the phrase is, hell in a basket.
Are you asking me?
Well, both of you. So is there accepting that the future is tense? Is there a place for optimism though?
One of the things that really struck me that I was incredibly surprised by and would not have picked up if I hadn't gone to visit the Chesapeake Bay and talk to everyone I could, very uncharacteristically because I'm an introverted person, but I really got chatty while I was there, was how hopeful they all were or how resilient they all were, that even people whose houses had actually fallen down into the sea would be saying, oh, what a pain it is. It was at that kind of level of what a pain. And yes, there was someone else who used to live way out to sea there. They moved to the mainland. Yeah, they had some relatives. It took them a while to pick themselves up, but they got on with things. And I kept on hearing that story of this great quality of people being able to pick themselves up and persist. And I think in the kind of the concentration on the doom, which is pretty grim, we forget that people have this incredible capacity to pick themselves up. And all the time, just this year I've been thinking, I probably should stop buying stuff because who knows when we'll have to pick ourselves up and leave. And it's this kind of adjustment that we're going through, I think, that we're feeling a precariousness. And I saw that precariousness there, but I didn't see a great fear of the precariousness of the world. And that was the thing. So I came out of it a little bit more hopeful than I went in. I was expecting to be all, the misery of life, melancholy, and doom and whatnot. But I came out of it thinking, God, people are pretty amazing. Like, they really will go off and make a new life. Somehow they cobble things together.
Yeah. And James, what did I mean, it's a bleak world that you portrayed, and do you retain some optimism though about the future?
Look, well, let me put it this way. I have a friend who talks about the knowledge, and her view is that the knowledge is that moment when you come to a proper understanding of what the science around climate says, like what it says about where we are and where we're going to be. And that science is incredibly confronting. And what it says is that our society cannot continue in the way it is. Now, there's a question about what it means when our society doesn't continue. But it seems to me when you're talking about optimism, there's kind of two things. One is a kind of, I think often hope and optimism are things people use as ways of not thinking about where we are. So they talk about this kind of Pollyanna-ish hope that things will be all right. And I don't think that's much use. I think actually we need to be really realistic about where we are. And it's one of the things I think the novel tries to do, to be realistic about the kind of scale of the challenges we face. But within that, I think that there are a couple of responses to that. And one of them is despair. Another one of them is this kind of retreat into selfishness. So you kind of, you become a prepper and start, hoarding food in your shed. Now, to be honest, I think putting some food in your shed is probably not a bad idea, but that's another question. But it seems to me that in fact, what Lucy's talking about is right. I mean, if you want optimism, the optimism lies in recognizing that our solutions lie in community, collective action, political change, all of those things that come from us working together and being, learning to be resilient. I just read a really fascinating book of history, which seems really unrelated, but isn't. But it's about the Little Ice Age. It's a history of the Little Ice Age, which was in the kind of through the middle of the last millennium. In the 17th century, which was the absolute worst of it, societies around the world were in terrible trouble. There was huge political unrest because of hunger, because temperatures dropped about 0.5 degree. Holland thrived. Holland built a huge empire, expanded, became richer. And that's because its people found ways of innovating, adapting, developed new systems of government, did all that kind of thing. So it's those kinds of things that give me hope, like that sense that, not so much that it's not all going to go bad, because I think it's going to get a lot worse than it does now, but it's that we have the capacity as human beings to find our way through it and adapt to it.
We need to get rid of Rupert Murdoch, though, don't we?
That'd be a good start.
That would be a huge help. I mean, I totally agree with you. I think all of that's true. And people are innovating all over the place, but they're getting stalled all the time by political systems. And that is the kind of disgrace, that there is a great will to change. There is a huge kind of fomenting, bubbling interest in inventing possible futures. There's the knowledge that can change the future, and yet there is just this great block of power.
Yeah. Well, all the scientists. Yeah. All the scientists will tell you that we have. All the scientists will tell you that we have the technological means to hold warming to 1.5 to 2 degrees. Which is going to be really bad, but survivable. The barriers are all political. So.
And in a sense, in both the books, the political disintegration is what's causing a lot of the problems for the characters.
Yeah, certainly true. Actually, my book I only set it a little bit in the future because I was going down a kind of plot line that had one of the younger people in a plot to kill Trump. And I just couldn't see how this was ever going to be something that would get published. And it seemed to me like the moral choice. Like, obviously, you're the good guy if you want to kill Trump. But I just thought, look, I might think that, but it's probably not going to go in the book. And so I pushed it a little bit further into the future to make it, you know, a little bit post-Trump. What's the effects of Trumpism? And it is this kind of dreadful, you know, a diaspora of people from the South of America, and social disintegration through the states, which we see armed militias. You know, we've seen them in the state capital of the Michigan capital. A whole lot of things like that do end up coming to be. And, you know, I have no doubt that things that James depicted in Ghost Species will come to be as well. Not, you know, not just the fires, but those kind of feelings of the world crumbling, you know, that accelerated decay of geographical structures. Yeah.
I mean, certainly when I was reading Wolfe Island, I just thought it was sort of virtually now. You know, it struck me that, you know, it could be next week.
It is. In my mind, it was. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, what to what extent is it also about Australia?
Well, I did try and argue this with my publisher that it was a metaphorical Australia. Yeah, it is. It is. It's about Australia. It's about the world. Yeah. It just happens to be set there. And in fact, the inclusion of the words Chesapeake Bay only happened very late in publication, just as a kind of anchorage. Yeah, no, it is. It's about the crumbling world and, yeah, the ways people are working to survive despite everything that's happening globally. In Australia too. Political systems decaying. Yeah, everything kind of falling apart. And yet all of us sort of putting up our blinkers and saying, we're okay here in this moment now. And I include myself. You know, I'm not on the run. I'm not protesting outside Government House. I'm not trying to track Scott Morrison down.
And similarly with James, with the question of extinction and de-extinction, that whole process, I was intrigued to read a story in The Guardian, I think this week, about them reviving 100-million-year-old microbes from the bottom of the sea. I mean, that was extraordinary.
That's an extraordinary story, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so they were from so they went out to the middle of the North Pacific Gaia. I never know whether you say Gaia or Gaia, which is the deadest part of the ocean. So there's the least biological activity there. It's 6 kilometers under the water, and then 100 meters down under the kind of silt that goes down, and there's no oxygen down there, and they pulled these microbes up and managed to coax them back into life. They reckon they're 101 million years old, and they've brought them back to life and got them replicating again. But it is kind of extraordinary. I mean, it's certainly one of the things I was trying to write about in the novel is that sense that time is out of joint. You know, that sense that the deep past is kind of collapsing into the present. You know, there are mammoths coming out of the ice in Siberia. There are, you know, kind of towns appearing out of dams as they dry out, you know, and simultaneously that sense that the future is somehow becoming unstable. And it's one of the things that I think Lucy's book's very much about, is that sense that we live in this kind of weirdly liminal moment where the past and the present and the future are kind of all inhabiting the same space. Now, it seemed to me that kind of idea of extinction and de-extinction was a really great way of thinking about that and trying to make it, I guess, tangible to people.
I mean, and there are projects going on, aren't there, trying to bring back the thylacine or bring back mammoths or something like that.
Absolutely. There are the thylacine one. I think they've done a lot of the groundwork. I actually talked to someone who was involved in the project, so they've kind of got quite a lot of the stuff in place, but they haven't done it. I think they're not allowed to for ethical reasons. But no, there's certainly, and they have de-extincted a couple of things that had just disappeared. But it is one of those things where, and I guess this is one of the things I was trying to get at in the book, is that this idea of de-extinction in many ways depends on the notion that what matters about a species is, in a sense, its genetic code. So we bring the animal back and it's de-extincted, but that's not actually the case. I mean, animals, like people, live in complex relationships with their environment. Many of them have culture. They have, all of these things that they know how to do and be. And when you take them out of an environment, they're not kind of defined just by their genetic code. They're defined by that culture. They're defined by their connections to other things. So when something drops out of the landscape, it's not just that the genetic material disappears. It's that this kind of web of connection it has with the landscape, this kind of way of being disappears. And so when you bring it back, do you bring those things back, or do you just bring back this kind of strange ghost, which is genetically that creature, but has none of the kind of culture or kind of complex ways that animal kind of knew how to be in its place.
Yeah. Which is the point you make about trees, isn't it, at one stage in the novel, about their...
Yes, absolutely.
And the trees and Eve, I mean, it's all linked, isn't it?
Yeah, everything's connected, and it's kind of fascinating. What I should have talked about more in the novel was fungus, because fungus connects everything. The secret substrate of the world.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things I always am quite interested in is the relationship between an author and his or her characters. And you've touched on it a bit, Lucy, but do they, when you finish your book, I mean, both at the heart of the books, there are two very strong female characters. Do they still live for you? Do you still, is Kitty with you? Is Eve with you, James?
Kitty sure is with me. Yeah, I could still, I have little passages that I read to myself, and I think she's still there. And I can't listen to the audio version because I'll lose my Kitty, because the audio version is not like my Kitty. I'm sure it's great, and I've heard really great things about it. I'm not opposed to it. Yeah, it's not my Kitty, and she feels very real to me. And occasionally people say to me, Kitty's so great, I would love to have her as a friend. And I just think, oh, really? Don't you think she'd be pretty scary as a friend? I think she'd be pretty abrupt. But I love having the thought of her around me.
Yeah. She's pretty formidable.
Yeah, she really is. And I don't think she'd have a lot of time for me. I'm just a little bit too wedded to my creature comforts.
I met Annie Prue many years ago, and I always imagine Kitty as rather like Annie Prue, I have to say.
I can see that.
Kitty is kind of like Patti Smith was my vision of her, kind of in the style sense. So that's how I kind of envisage her, but tougher, grittier.
Yeah.
But yeah,
and what about you and Eve, James?
I guess, I think one of the things about Ghost Species in particular is that although it's kind of about these kind of big themes, it's this weirdly personal book. And it was very much like those characters felt very close to me. I wanted to find a way. I guess one of the things that happens when you're writing about environmental stuff is you suddenly become aware that everything is connected, everything touches everything. And I wanted to find a way of writing which was very much like there was kind of no boundary between me and the work, if that makes sense. And so there's a whole lot of stuff, there's a whole lot of stuff in the book which is synthesized really directly kind of out of my life. And I don't mean by that it's narrowly autobiographical, but I was kind of just letting stuff happen and not worrying about kind of, I'm not explaining myself very well. There's a sense in which it's a very personal kind of book. So a lot of that stuff about Eve and about Kate, her mother, and about the kind of characters around them is drawn very closely from my own life. I just started writing the book just as my dad died. So there's a lot of that in it. There's a lot of stuff about parenting in it. There's a lot of stuff about particularly my mum's life in it. And so I guess it's less that the character continues to live for me than a sense that the book is deeply connected to a lot of stuff that's very personal for me. Does that kind of make sense? So it's almost the other way around in an odd kind of way. But no, absolutely. It's one of those funny books where I think I like it more now I've finished it than I did when I was writing it, if that makes any sense. Like it kind of, I mean, I have a quite, yeah, I mean, it's a book that I feel good about now that it's done. And often you don't feel good about things when you finish them, I find. You know, maybe 10 years later you look at them and think, no, it wasn't bad. But, you know, the immediate aftermath of things, you often don't feel good about them.
Yeah, Lucy, did you feel good about Wolfe Island when you finished it? Did you
Look, it was a killing book to write, and I could never really work out why. It was so much harder than Salt Creek, and I thought it was going to be a bit easier because it's contemporary. No, it was just, I don't know. It just took me a really long time to work out what kind of book it was. And I can't really explain even what I mean by that. But, you know, I would just go into these massive digressions and, you know, I wrote about 50 pages on vegetable gardening in raised garden beds and thought, oh, no one's going to want to read that. But it would take me 2 months to do that. And then I would just think, oh, forget it. No vegetable garden material. And it just kept on happening like that. And when it was done, there's bits of it that I still can't look at. I just think, all I can see is the grind of working on it. And there's other bits that I just think, oh yeah, no, that's what I meant. I meant that. I love, you know, that voice. I just think I really like that bit. The entirety of it. I don't know. I think as a writer, you have such a complicated relationship with your work. And even looking at little passages, I think, oh, you know, tautology. Why did you do that? You know, just little niggly things. I just think, should have had one. And I felt like I went through it 5 million times. But there's just stuff that I keep anyway. You have to just look at it and move on.
Yeah. When you do a reading, do you ever change something as you go along? You know, you might be reading a chunk and hit a word and think, no, that I should have used this word or something, and change it.
I go through before and then I cross them out.
Yeah.
I just cross out. I do a little quick edit on the way through. Yeah. It's a bit deceitful, isn't it?
Oh, oddly enough, I just did. There's a new edition of my second book, The Deep Field, coming out soon, and I had to read, because there were no files left. They had to scan it back into a thing. So there's lots of errors in the version. I had to go through and kind of re-proof it. And I had to work really hard not to rewrite it. Like, you know, it's kind of like, and I fixed a few things up on the way through, but there'd be whole sections where you'd be like, God, could I just trim that back a bit?
Yes. Yeah, there's bits of Salt Creek I look at, and I think you really were reading Cormac McCarthy at the time, weren't you?
Okay, now, look, we've probably had enough from me. There are a few questions that have come in. So I might refer to them now and read them to you. So this one comes from Chris, who's, I think, says, Lucy has written a testimonial on the back cover of James's book. Does that mean you two have known each other for a while? How do authors obtain testimonials for their novels?
No, we haven't known each other.
No.
It's not on the back of my copy, but I've got a proof copy of.
I loved it, so I did nice things. Yeah. Well, my publisher gets in touch with people, and then I know she spares me people turning down my work, and I don't know. I didn't have any testimonials for Salt Creek, and that seemed to go okay. And I think it's a combination of who do you know, who you think, or who do you think will appreciate the work that you're doing, who understands the material that you're working with and where you're coming from and what you've achieved. I think that's what you're looking for, is that good fit for your work and someone whose work you also like, I hope. You know, it's that kind of connection that you're looking for. And, you know, I'm a big admirer of James's work, so I was delighted to do that. Yeah. No, I love The Resurrectionist. I remember vividly that book.
You're the person who liked it. No, I'm being ridiculous. Thank you. That's lovely of you. I was going to say, I also think the testimonial thing's really interesting because it is a symptom, I think, of the changing media landscape. Because, I mean, 10 years ago, you got testimonials for your first book. So they'd go out and get blurbs for your first book usually. And then from then on, you just use reviews. Yeah. And the problem is now there's almost no reviews because the amount of reviewing has dropped so significantly. Lots of books don't get reviewed at all, and so they seem to have moved into a thing where they, even when people are publishing 5th, 6th, 7th books, they're kind of soliciting testimonials from other writers and other people. I suspect also it's to do with that shift over to kind of Twitter and Instagram and things like that, and that kind of sense that personal endorsement is so much more important than it used to be. But it's interesting. I mean, it is a very strange, it's a very uncomfortable process in a weird kind of way, because they'll ask you, who do you want us to ask? And you have to kind of say, oh, who could you ask? Who have I not offended recently that you could ask? But it's a very strange, I mean, you must have found that as well, Lucy. It's a very fraught kind of process. Working out who to ask.
It's horrible. It's just horrible. I just wish they would ban it and say, no more of that stuff. And, sometimes when I look at endorsements, and I was talking about this with a couple of friends, I don't know if I should say this. Anyway, I'm not giving you their names. And we were just saying, I didn't know they knew that person. And we kind of presumed that there must be some connection between the endorser and the endorsee. And we were trying to piece together that kind of connection, presuming that was what was going on. Yeah, so I think that sometimes that happens. But, I also think that there is a lot of really genuine material that makes it into those endorsements, that people say things they really, it's a heartfelt thing. I really want that book to do well in the world. I think it's important.
Well, presumably, if you're doing an endorsement and you don't like the book, I mean, you don't do it. You don't do an endorsement. No. So you have to assume that most of them are genuine. Although I once talked to James Elroy about it, and he used to do loads of them. He said he didn't read the books. He just. I don't
think Stephen King reads the books. He's a chronic blurber.
Yeah. Now that question was not from Chris. Sorry, that was from Lisette. So there's a second question now from, hang on, let me just see who this one is from. This is from Robin, who directs this to you, Lucy, and asks, was it very different writing Wolfe Island from writing Salt Creek?
It was in the kind of, in the process with Salt Creek, I sort of started at the beginning and had these little tent poles of events that I kept on aiming towards. As they were like, like a plane trip to London or something. I knew I had to land in Singapore and Tehran and then London. So I knew these points that I had to cover and basically wrote in a linear way. But by the time I started writing Wolfe Island, I had persuaded myself that I'd written in a slightly different way, which was in fragments. And I wrote Wolfe Island in fragments and nearly tore my hair out trying to fit this vast kind of network of scraps of material. And I had vivid and horrible nightmarish memories of crawling around on my studio floor between the printouts of all of these things with a little pair of scissors and some sticky tape, trying to make sense of it all and just trying everything I could to do it. So in that sense, in the kind of craft sense, totally different in my approach. But also Salt Creek was, in my memory, incredibly easy to write by comparison with Wolfe Island, which was terribly difficult to write. And I still don't really know why it was, but I really don't know. But I think every book is different and you just find a way to slog through to the end if you're determined enough, honestly. Yeah.
It's fascinating though, isn't it? Because there's no sense in the book. Like the book feels so fluid, doesn't it? And Jason, I mean, I think it's an incredibly fluid feeling book. You don't have any sense that it's been pieced together at all.
Is this Wolfe Island?
Yeah.
I can just see these great big enormous scenes like they're this wide of me cobbling together the bits of information. Yeah, but
I'm amazed at that, Lucy. To somebody who doesn't write books, this notion of you piecing together bits of it that you've already written and trying to make sense of it is it's unimaginable, to be honest.
I was not in a good state when I was doing it. I don't know what to tell you. I would come home and people would just look at me and say, better steer clear of her for a couple of hours. I was beside myself, honestly. It's like being possessed by something not good, but knowing there's no way out but going through. Yeah.
Now, there's another question from Dorothy Simmons, who asks, to what extent do responses to the current COVID pandemic confirm or undermine your thinking in writing the novel? What reaction to your novels would satisfy you most?
Ooh.
Well, an end to fossil fuels, obviously, would be a great response to my novel. But I don't think that's going to happen somehow as a result of my novel.
You said something really interesting about that. The purposes of climate-related novels at a recent panel, the instrumentalization.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm always kind of slightly weirded out about that idea that. So I have two completely conflicting positions on this. One is that that we end up doing this thing where we talk about fiction in the kind of environmental space, and what you want to do is say, what's it going to do? How's it going to change the world? And it seems to me that's the wrong question. We don't ask that about, we don't ask if a novel about divorce is going to stop divorce. I mean, it's like, it's kind of the wrong test, but, and in a sense, I think it often mistakes the point of the fiction. I mean, it seems to me that the fiction is not really about advocating for change. The fiction is about trying to capture what it's like to live in the middle of all of this, but also often about trying to make a kind of space for people to think about it differently, think about it more constructively, think about it more creatively. So it's not, that kind of sense that, it's going to change the world seems to be the wrong test. But I do think one of the things it can do really powerfully is I think lots of us exist in a really weird, one of the problems with where we are is that lots of us know that the world is going wrong in a whole series of ways. And yet it's like the pandemic. The world is completely out of control, yet we're all busy going on with our daily lives. And there's that kind of weird dissonance that you begin to inhabit. And I think that can be really difficult over long periods of time. That kind of sense that your experience of the world is completely out of kilter with your intellectual understanding of what's going on in the world. And one of the things I think fiction lets you do is I guess kind of sit in that space for a while and not, find a way of kind of not having to inhabit the dissonance, a way of kind of looking at the thing that we're dealing with. So, I mean, I think it does have uses. I'm not sure that asking it to stop climate change is necessarily the right test to put on it, though, because it's going to fail. It'd be lovely if it did. I mean, the inconsistent thing I would say, and I'm going to stop in a second, is that it does seem to me that one of the mistakes we've made is to say that fiction shouldn't have a kind of interaction with the real world. And one of the things that I think is really interesting when you look at the debates around a whole lot of fiction at the moment is that when people talk about fiction being harmful or fiction being useful, what they're actually doing is saying fiction can have real world effects, I think that's really interesting. This kind of notion that we've moved away from the idea that it's kind of art that exists for its own sake to the idea that it might actually do something in the world. And I think that's kind of exciting and interesting.
One of the things I think it's done a little bit, and I'm really aware of this now that we're all in lockdown, Melbourne, and we're like severely locked down, and I'm in a really hotspot suburb, and we're very, very wary everywhere we go, is that it can postulate change and make us inhabit it in that kind of, we can kind of try on future lives. Like, what will that be like? What would that be like? And so living now in Melbourne with everything locked down, it feels kind of surreal, but also the kind of surreality that I feel like I've inhabited before in fictions. And so I feel somehow as if I've been prepared for weirdness. This is this particular weirdness. The weirdness of COVID is not exactly the weirdness that I've been reading about, but it is strange and it is life-changing. And if fiction does anything, it can give that sense that we are not alone in that experience of living in strangeness. Not only we inhabit real strangeness now, real surreal strangeness, but we've experienced that before in fiction. So it feels weirdly familiar to me. And I just think, looking at COVID, which was part of that question, I'm not expecting anyone to find any answers to that in Wolfe Island. But I think it's, and with ghost species as well, those worlds feel strange, but they feel like, in the moment of reading, they feel real enough for us to inhabit and to experience that strangeness.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. Okay, now, unfortunately, it seems like we've run out of time. So I would recommend to everybody who's watching this, who has not read Ghost Species or Wolfe Island, that you should make sure that you do. And Lucy, James, thank you very much for your time tonight. And I hope we all look forward to Right Around the Murray in September, and you can catch Lucy and James then again, I think. And a very good night. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for launching our WAM 2020 online program in fine form. And as Jason has just said, James, Lucy and Jason will all be back with us in September. Lucy is going to be responding to the provocation history, What Is It Good For? And also announcing our short story winner. James will be talking more about his book on a panel, Animal Magnetism, with Laura Jean McKay and Chris Flynn. And also interviewing Rebecca Giggs about her book Fathoms. And Jason will be back interviewing Kate Grenville about A Room Made of Leaves, and Emma Viskich and Nick Gadd in a crime panel. So really looking forward to having you all back. So pleased the internet was on our side tonight. And yeah, look, really, really hope everyone out there will come back and be part of the festival in September. Our program is up on the website now. You can sign up for email updates to stay in touch. Follow us on Facebook. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.